So, hello everyone. Thanks a lot for joining in for Academy of Association of Professional Photographers of Czech Republic. I'm your host tonight, Krzysztof Korč, and welcome to this festive edition of our program. Today, I've got four interesting people to talk about one very interesting theme about Mr. Miroslav Tichý and his work. And first we should say why we are discussing this quite, anyone could say, old topic. I think it's quite important to discuss narratives that are kind of cemented into the art world and which hasn't been changed for a long time, but there is still, I guess, big space for improvement of the story that is told about Miroslav Tichý, about his work, and about his position in the art world. First of all, we're gonna have like 45 minutes of the talk itself. Then there is a space for your questions and your additions. Please feel free to sign them up under the YouTube channel to the comments. We can pick them up afterwards and answer them or react to them. I would love to introduce my four guests tonight. Starting in alphabetical order is Nataša von Kopp, who works as independent filmmaker, photographer, and as a teacher of film and film history, and makes film and photography workshops with children. Hello, Nataša. Nice to have you here. Then there's Marc Lenot, French art critic, writing mostly about contemporary art and photography, and he authored several essays about Tichý and wrote master thesis on him. He's an author of Lunette Rouge, I hope I read it right. It's the column in Le Monde, and manager of website Flusser France. He's an author of recent novel about Edvard Munch. Hello, Marc. Nice to have you. We have Thomas Schimbrok. I also hope I read it right. I don't speak French or German very well, so hopefully it's okay. He's a photography historian, collaborating as a free agent with various artists and museums. He curated more than 120 exhibitions on photography in various countries, and is an editor and writer for numerous books about photography. He was head of Zephyr in Mannheim until summer of 22, member of DFA and German Photographic Academy, and managing board of German Photographic Society. Hello, Thomas. And finally, Mr. Pavel Vančát, nice to have you. Founder of Fotograf magazine, part of board member of the gallery Fotograf and Fotograf magazine, curator, translator, publicist, and all these people have actually been in touch with Mr. Tichý, documented him, curated his exhibition, wrote about him, and were parts of the narrative making of Mr. Tichý's or Mr. Tichý's work. So nice to have you all. And before we start, I think that it's good to give a little introduction. I don't want to pinpoint any specific ideas. So for you all who need to refresh a little bit who Mr. Tichý was, I have just a few dates and a few major events. I won't bore you very much from the beginning. He was born on 20th of November in 1926 in Nedčice, to the family of a tailor and a secretary. In his young age, he studied Academy of Arts. He studied painting, actually. His first exhibitions were group exhibitions between years 56 and 58, all in Czech Republic. Then he stops to paint, actually. He starts to photograph, but more on that later. And the first exhibitions of photographic work emerge in 1990 in Germany. He's a part of 34 artists in an Art Brut exhibition. The major breakthrough was when Mr. Seaman noticed him, displayed him in Sevilla in 2004. Then he gets to Arles, to be very short, or to be very brief, as I can't find a word. Maybe someone of you can help me out. He was exhibited. Yeah. Thanks a lot. And then his stardom booms. Actually, he's got, as Marc Lenot very nicely put together, between years 2004 and 2009, he had like 29 solo exhibitions and 18 collective exhibitions all around the world. And these were the years when he was one of the, I can cite Nataša von Kopp and say that he was a world star at the time, exhibiting everywhere. He was in talks everywhere, and these are the main years when all the narratives about him arose, when there were many stories, were many stories about Mr. Tichý and his work emerged. And as we would like to show you today, or a little bit, or explain a little bit today, is that there are many discourses which are different and which are a little bit contradicting one another. So it's always good to start at the beginning, and Pavel Vančát prepared for us a little insight into his early work and compares it with artists at the time. So Pavel, if I could ask you, you have a word.
Yeah, I'm ready here, and I'm trying to share the screen, which is this one. I hope that does work. Can you see the lady in white now? I hope you can. So just few words which I consider to be important with Tichý is to kind of, there was in the beginning there was a myth around Tichý that he's a man who is kind of caveman, or let's say man out of nowhere, man out of man with who's an alien to art world and who comes from complete outside, who comes from some ancient times, and he rediscovers photography in some unpredictable way. And that's something which interested me very much when I was researching his work in 2006, when I was preparing his first Czech retrospective for House of Art in Brno. And then in 2009, I did another exhibition which was even closer to this topic of Tichý's early beginnings, and that was held in Krakow at the Month of Photography, and it was called Miroslav Tichý, Origins of Style. And based on these two exhibitions, just few notes which I find important, and that's maybe I would get even a little bit further here to understand the background of Tichý. And this slightly bizarre film poster from 1961 is work of Mr. Zdeněk Fremund, and Fremund was Tichý's friend, together with Vladimír Vašíček, a man who started painting about 2-3 years earlier, who was Tichý's colleague at the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, and who, as many of this generation, was very much influenced by Cubism, by Expressionism, by Fauvism, and by, let's say, interwar or even, let's say, early 20th century French painting, which by that time, in fact, after the break of the Second War, when most of the, let's say, Entartete Kunst was forbidden and wasn't possible to be exhibited. So, which came to second outbreak, and which even after the era of Stalinism, which in Czechoslovakia was active till, let's say, mid-50s, around 1956, was a breaking point when the new, let's say, neo-avant-garde tendencies were again visible. So this group of artists, which we can see, for example, here, was becoming active. They were in the years when they were in their 30s, early 40s, and this group is especially interesting because, as you can see, it's Vladimír Vašíček himself, the one of the forerunners of this like humble modernism, the post-war modernism, which was kind of mimicking the original painting modernism. And then behind him, you can see Miroslav Tichý still in his, let's say, more civil appearance. And then the man on the right is Adolf Kroupa. And Adolf Kroupa was director of the House of Arts in Brno since mid-50s till early 1970s. And he was, in 1956, he was presenting one of the early exhibitions which presented again the modern tendencies in paintings and sculpture in Czechoslovakia. And Miroslav Tichý was having, I think, 3 paintings at this exhibition. And in fact, it was his, let's say, last public appearance in, let's say, the art world of 1950s in Czechoslovakia. But it's important to know that he was in this circle, and this circle, Vašíček and Fremund and others, where are till now are legendary painters of 1950s, 60s. Next to them, we can also mention Ota Janeček, who was also a close friend with this circle, who was not from Moravia, the eastern part of Czechoslovakia, but was very often visiting this group in Kyjov and around Kyjov, where they were mostly located. So in mid-50s, we still see Tichý as promising, let's say, late modernist artist. And then the big question is how to understand his further development. And in this sense, we have to quote what he mentioned quite often, and that's connected to his, let's say, mental health, mental balance, which was his lifetime issue, which even probably got much worsened after his service in communist army in late 1940s, when he didn't finish the academy and was then taken to the army. And that's where started his, let's say, mental problems, often visiting the mental hospital. And by, let's say, around mid-50s, he probably decided not to present his work in public. So if we go a little bit further. So in fact, most probably what we can find in his drawings from 1950s and 1960s, which were found in quite a big amount, so is compressed into these simple sketches. And I really like one story which I've heard from one of his friends in Kyjov. In fact, for some time he was just having piles of papers, which every few minutes he just made up a quick, simple sketch in very bravura manner, and then he puts the sketch into his oven or into his stove, and then he was in fact keeping the stove uh, alive by making new sketches and then putting them on fire again and again. Of course, in that way we wouldn't have any sketches left, and we have some of them, let's say a few hundreds, I would say, what I could see. But in fact, this this image of Tichý keeping some fire through sketching on and on and on, and keeping the fire of modernist artist is something which probably led him to photography, and which led him to kind of obtaining the images in a slightly different way, but still like being, let's say, fed by the image, by the similarity to some, let's say classical figures, classical examples of figure, of landscape, of composition, and so on. So I think to get to deeper study of Tichý means to make a deeper comparison of his early work and later work, and to understand his photography as just different way, maybe simplification, or even some kind of mechanical translation of his early career into what we know now as Tichý, as outsider and caveman. So in fact, the story is reverse, and it's man who simplified so far that he got to unique style. So that's what I wanted to say simply.
Thank you, Pavel. We'll definitely get a little bit more into this later, but it's a good question to put it on now, actually. I heard that he was actually not able to paint from some time, so he picked up the photography as some kind of a substitution, or as a logical continuation of a need for creative work. Would you agree on that? Or
I think with painting it's more also technical question, that it was also a question of like obtaining the canvas, the oil colors and so on, and having space and concentration for that. And I think it's something which he gradually lost. He even had his studio for some time, in fact, in the opposite house across the street. And I don't remember now when exactly he was expelled from that studio, but I think it was probably in late 50s, early 60s. So I think this was quite a break for, like, let's say, point of no return for his artistic career. And I would say even probably that when he stopped drawing mostly. On the other hand, there are many drawings which are in very harsh, almost like erotic or sometimes even pornographic style, but you can buy the style, you can see that they are mostly from 70s, 80s, maybe even older. Of course, he didn't date anything, so it's just but if you see the style he was developing slowly, so probably it's much later. But they are smaller, they are simpler, they are just small sketches, and they don't have this beautiful bravura of say, which reminds you of Matisse or some classical painting. And so that's one thing. And on the other hand, I didn't mention that, and I think it's quite obvious when you see the drawings and then you see some of his photographs, which are not often, but many of the most outstanding ones are even finished by pencil. So in fact, when his photographic technique was failing in picturing all the shapes and even sometimes the swimsuit contours and so on, so he couldn't help himself not to, in fact, get it into the picture by pencil to get the perfect picture. And that's again like this obsessive need to have the shape and the beauty of woman's appearance complete.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else has an addition on this? Thomas, Mark, Natasha?
No, not now. One of the one remark comes by itself, because I wanted to tell a little about Tichy's photography, and interesting enough, Tichý was having contact to the medium photography very early, but the friends he was having while he was studying at Art Academy in Prague told us in the interviews, I have to explain, we were doing an exhibition on Miroslav Tichý, made a catalog called Die Stadt der Frauen, the City of Women. And unfortunately, it's all in German. Everything, most of the interviews were done in Czech language and later translated into German. Thank you very much for that. But we couldn't afford to print the book in English too. So it is a little lost. It's a little lost knowledge, unfortunately, because English is lingua franca today. But we learned from the friends of Miroslav Tichý that he did not have any images painted by himself or taken as photographs in the room where he was living when he was studying at Art Academy. He went to Art Academy, he was painting there, but he had no reference to that, what he was doing in the rented room where he was living. And after he left Art Academy, that was, I guess, in 1948, because his narrative was that the students were no longer allowed to paint models, female models, but should have to paint workers and so on. So he refused to paint workers and heroes of labor. And so that was the reason why he was expelled and he had to join the army. And this joining the army seemed to be traumatic for him. And after he left the army, he went back to Kyjov, where his parents had that little tailor shop. And he met a lot of people there, like Jiří Dundera, Ladislav Bizek, Petr Čejp, a Mr. Zoldan, and last not least, a Mr. Sonnevent, who was taking experimental photographs in the 1950s. And this Mr. Sonnevent, he was owning a villa in Kyjov, and he was doing exhibitions there. And part of the images which has the gallery in Hodonín, when I remember right, were taken out of that villa of Mr. Sonnevent, where they were still left after the rest ended. But Tichý did not take photographs. They were all taking photographs in a way together. They were collaborating. They were doing optical experiments like in the Bauhaus years also. But there's nothing left which could be named as a genuine Tichý or Tichý. We know for sure that the mental problems which Tichý was having over the years increased dramatically after the year 1972. And this came because he did something which was in these days and nowadays even more not appropriate. He was in a store and he touched a girl on her bottom. Therefore, he went to jail, and there were two possibilities. He got like 9 months in jail, and he could. And he said, "No, I go to jail. This won't be a problem." But after 6 months or so, he decided to claim for himself that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, and therefore his mother had to take charge for him in the future. He could leave the prison instantly, and after a very short time after he was out of prison, his studio in Svatoborska Street was ransacked and by police or communal police, and his images were thrown out and landed on the street. This was a second very traumatic experience for him, because he lost the images, B, because many were destroyed, and B, he lost his studio. And all the people I was speaking to, or we have been speaking to in Kyjov, said that this more or less was the time when Tichý started taking photographs. It is very difficult to find out from which year a photograph of Miroslav Tichý is, because in his photographic style, he has something which we call in German, I don't know the exact word in English, we call überzeitlich, which means you cannot say from which year these images are, because they are as modern today in 2022 as they have been in 1980 or 1990. They are out of time, and the figures he's constructing, the women he's taking, the images of the women he's taking, they stand for themselves, and they are symbols of deep desire of I don't know what his reason was. Tichý had a clear plan, which was similar to the 5-year plans of communist society. He said, every day I want to make 100 photographs. And so he went out and he took his tour through Kyjov and was taking his photographs. If that were 100 or less or more, who knows, it is not that important. And he was having 3 cameras with different lenses, short, teleobjective with a short millimeters and a regular one, which he was using simultaneously or parallelly. And
can I jump into that a little?
Yes, go in.
There are a few things actually which I would like to know. If we are in the midst of debunking his story, I would love to know how verifiable all or some of these claims are. Because, for example, when I start from the last one, in Natasha's documentary, he gets exactly this question, like, do you work with photographs like in this communist 5-year plan? And he denies it, actually. Also the sexual nature of his work and him ending in as a detainee for touching women's bottom. Is that verifiable, or was it verified? I would just like to know which of these claims are firm, actually.
I can
very shortly on because the story with the girl. There used to live a lady in Kyjov, which was very close with Tichý, Madame Tsepova, and she was highly interesting person who was under pressure from the regime, and she and her husband were working as heaters because they were, I think, Protestant. They wanted to become Protestant priests, and this was not a chance for them, though they were ending there. And they were very close, and we were also having images. And all the claims I'm saying are at least covered by two individuals in interviews.
Okay, thank you for the confirmation. And Pavel wanted to add something, I guess.
Firstly, I think Mr. Tate was one of the, let's say, amateur photographers who also taught Tichý, and because he was having a dark room, probably quite well equipped, and it was fashion of the time to develop your own photos at home. So I think he was one of the influences on Tichý, on Tichý's photography. And with the accusation of Tichý being accused of touching the girl, so I can confirm that I even tried to do some research in the archive of the communist prisons, and it was definitely there. How much it was absolutely sure, and how much it was because in Tichý, I think in Kyjov he was taken as a local, let's say, figure. Some loved him. There were circles who were very important for him, and he was important for them. But still, I think they were in minority. And on the other hand, he was taken as a kind of, let's say, suspicious persona.
Element.
In general, around Kyjov, so many people just thought of him. He's kind of useless, funny guy. Some hated him, some even wanted to get all things in order, including him. So, but on the other hand, I wouldn't think it was made up. It might be quite true that he probably was suffering from some kind of obsessive behavior most of his lives, which somehow probably he kept under control, but there might be some moments when probably it went a bit too far. But I don't think it was common, and I think it was something very exceptional. Just in his cases, he was a, like say, extreme figure in extreme times, so it got so far in by the court.
Very,
thank you very much.
Pavel is very right, I think. I guess that what definitely the authorities in Kyjov did was they were using him as an example. They simply showed their power because it was very difficult to impress him with their power in a regular way during the daily life. So that was their chance. And whatever it is, Madame Lydia Chepova said that actually he simply touched the bottom of the girl in a store. And that was that, and that he went to jail for that for 9 months. This is something which is somehow strange, in a way, at least for me. But I don't know how the laws in Czechoslovakia were in these days. Yeah,
at least it was uncommon for that era, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just trying to find out how well we can say that that it's verifiable. So it could be actually found, written down. So yeah, this is confirmed. Like it should have happened, or at least the last regime analyst says it happened. So okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have it. Lydia Tsepova actually saw the event. At least she confirmed that she saw the event, how it was happening, and it was in a toy store where it happened. And the girl was 14 and was well developed, and so in a way. That was, yeah.
Okay. So just let's get to another one, or maybe if Marc or Natasha want to add something, I would love to explore the second claim, the 5-year communist type of a plan, and him doing the work so serially and doing as like these 100 pictures a day. Were you aware of that? Because in Natasha, in your documentary, he denies that actually, but it's his later age, so.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot say if it's true or if it's not true, but as I remember him or how I met him, I can imagine that he said it as a joke. I mean, it's like a parody, and it's all, of course, also the urge to. It's a nice narrative, right? That he's having this plan and making it's this narrative of a maniac making photographs like a plan. Yeah, so I presume if he ever said something like that, then it was rather considered as a joke. But maybe someone else will contradict me. I don't know.
I would agree with what Natasha just said. I think we are talking here about the narratives built by others, but Tichý himself was building his own narrative. And a lot of what he said is fantasy. Maybe not a lie, but some fantasy. So the idea of making 100 photos a day, if you look at the film, okay, we don't have all the films, but if you look at the films, for example, there are very few in the winter. There are very few with snow. Most of the films, not only the photos he printed, but the films he made, there are very, very few where you see snow on the ground. Now, I don't know how many months per year there's snow on the ground in Kyjov, but probably quite a few. So Tichý was telling a lot of stories. When I met him, he told me a story, and Yana Ebnarova said, "That's not true, that's not true." He told me the story. He was in the army, and he arrested a woman, a spy, an American woman who was a spy that he arrested in the army. And Yana said, no. So Tichý himself was constructing a sort of fiction of his own life, of his own story, of what he was doing. So everything he says, we have to take with a pinch of salt, thinking, okay, part of it is true, part of it is not. I think what's important, what you did, Thomas, is indeed compare that with what other people said, interview other people who could confirm or infirm or say that. But some of it is, we have to look at it as a bit of fantasy. Thomas, one thing you said surprised me. You said he had only 3 cameras? I think he had more. You said he had only 3 cameras, a short, a medium, and a teleobjective. I think he had more.
He definitely had more. I said that we can prove that he was using simultaneously or parallel 3 cameras. He was going out with 3 cameras with different lenses on it, so he could switch between the motives. But he definitely had more cameras. Yes.
I think he had one. I don't know. He made it just to photograph the screen of the TV. As you know, Kyjov is close to the Austrian border, so he would get the Austrian shows, which were a little more sexy than the Czechoslovakian ones, and he photographed that. And from what I understood, but I may be mistaken, he had 1 camera especially for that, among others. But I think there are 10 or 12 cameras in total, I think.
If I may have a note, so firstly, I think with this 5-year plan, it's quite classical. I would say it was a fashion between, let's say, the opposition during the communists, let's say, to ironize or to mimic the speech of the regime and to make fun of it. So in fact, they were like ironizing the regime by pretending to do the same, but in very bizarre way. So maybe I think that's might be the route. But I got to one nice explanation by Zdeněk Bašíček, who was another of Tichý's friends, quite important Czech philosopher and historian who spends most of the 70s, 80s in emigration. But in 1950s and 16s, they were close together, and he told me that, in fact, Tichý also loved to walk around the city. And they, in fact, instead of sitting in a pub or, I don't know, like meeting at home, so they were walking around Kyjov for hours. And that's something which nicely explains this plan, which wasn't planned probably of like 100 photos a day, but more of like going out and then kind of observing the city, capturing what's interesting. And I think that's probably something which, as these like philosophical disputations which they had on the way through Kyjov, and probably they weren't just these two men, but many others who like to walk around with Tichý. So that's something which probably was the real plan, instead of like doing this communist 100 a day.
Okay, thank you for the comments.
Gets into the game, let's say the obsession, in fact, kind of even playing with the time of being not forced to go to work every day, which was a big privilege during communism, when everybody had to go to work and had to have an occupation. So all this together, in fact, made up Tichý into some kind of, in fact, antique philosopher or Greek philosopher who walks around and just comments, in this case, in a visual way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks a lot. And I think that the most important part, or not the most, but the important message here is that there are many stories about each part of his life, about each part of his work, and it's actually pretty hard to confirm them. And as you mentioned, his story making, or his pinching a little bit salt in the stories, I guess that now is a good time to play those two excerpts from Natasha's documentary, which I wanted to play in the end, which actually shows Mr. Tichý talking about his work. So if I may, I would like to play them now. It's just 2.5 minutes. So, and thanks a lot for them, Natasha. So.
There seems to be no sound.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I trained it like a million times to put the audio there, and so. Sorry for the delay, just making sure it's gonna work. And we're not gonna have to repeat it.
Lidi na koupališti a toto, no.
Krajiny vás nezajímaly tolik?
Ne.
Proč lidi?
Lidi mě zajímali, já nevím proč, ty pohyby, kompozice, compositation.
Anglicky composition.
Composition.
Aha. A většinou ženy?
Ne, co tam bylo, co jsem viděl, co tam bylo, to jsem fotil. No.
Ale možná, že ženy jsou taky zajímavější než muži, ne?
Wahrscheinlich já. Pravděpodobně ano. Pohyb. Ještě jsou tam ty fotografie někde na zemi, pod papírama.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was the fourth excerpt. That's gonna go on the end actually. But I guess this one before summed it nicely a little bit. The stuff we talked about. So, and after this intermission, we've got planned Thomas, and Thomas has an entry of photographic work and commercial exploitation of Mr. Tichý. So if I could ask you to go live with that. Thomas, sorry, you are muted. So
sorry for that. That's quite a short, compulsory idea how the system worked, and how we learned about Tichý, because there are different players in the game who were profiting from the fame which Tichý received over the years. And as we learned, it was Harald Seemann with a biennial in Sevilla who started the fame of Miroslav Tichý in 2005. And in 2004 and in 2005, Kunsthaus Zürich with Tobias Betzola made the first big international exhibition, and they also made a catalog. And Tobias Betzola was the only curator, as far as I know, and I might not know everything, who tried to reach Miroslav Tichý and ask him for allowance and participation into that exhibition. But Miroslav Tichý refused to do so. Why ever? And I don't know if Tobias Betzola asked him directly or if it was via Roman Buxbaum, because the work of Miroslav Tichý was discovered by an individual called Roman Buxbaum, a Swiss psychiatrist and art collector, who grew up in Kyjov, and his uncle, Harry Buxbaum, was the psychiatrist of Tichý. And his grandmother, Roman Buxbaum's grandmother was the neighbor of Tichý. So even as a young child, Roman Buxbaum was used to see Miroslav Tichý in the garden, outside. Roman Buxbaum claimed that Tichý was building a camera for him in the year 1961, which would be the very first camera of which we know that it was built. But anyway, and later in the 1980s, Roman Buxbaum started to collect the images of Miroslav Tichý, and that is proven by documents which either he presented on his websites, which were called Tichý Ancien Ocean 1 to Tichý Ocean 4, or which were presented on the website of Miroslav Tichý's neighbor Jana Hebnerova. And on these different websites, documents were shown, in which the contracts between Roman Buxbaum and the neighbor, Jana Hebnerova, were published. One of these contracts said that Jana Hebnerova was getting 300,000 Czech crowns for her supportive work. Another one said that that was, I think, on the website of Jana Hebnerova. A second one by Jana Hebnerova said that she received for 2,000, that she sold 2,000 images of Miroslav Tichý to Roman Buxbaum for 100 euros each. And later, Jana Hebnerova claimed this all was wrong. She never got so much money from Roman Buxbaum, and on. So a big lawsuit started between the two, which was, as far as I know, ended a couple of years after Miroslav Tichý had died. So we know at least that the highest price which would have been paid by Roman Buxbaum for the images he received from Jana Hebnerova was 100 euros in the, let's say, in the years around 2004 or 5. And shortly after these first exhibition, the prices at galleries like Hoppen or Arndt and Partner were starting with more than 1,000 euros and went up to 13,000 euros. So there is a certain factor in it which makes it clear that the business to deal with Miroslav Tichý was very successful and it gained a big economic profit. And this economic profit was institutionalized by Roman Buxbaum by founding a foundation, Tichý Ocean, which is located, as far as I know, and this is the last, which I found out a couple of years ago, in Liechtenstein, which is a notorious safe haven for foundations who want to work in the dark. And he seems, as far as I remember, as Nataša von Kopp also interviewed him and asked him directly that he is the only owner of that foundation. And so all the work he gained, which he did not sell, goes to the foundation. He's able to sell it later. And there's one other very interesting aspect. This is an organization called Tichý for Artists, Artists for Tichý, where many artists from various countries, from Erwin Wurm from Austria to Stefanie Schneider from Germany to I don't know whom else, were trading images. They gave images to Roman Buxbaum, or let's say to the foundation, and they received images of Miroslav Tichý back. So this was, and by this, Roman Buxbaum was able to acquire quite a remarkable collection of contemporary artwork. I haven't seen it. I think it is somewhere in Prague on display, but I don't know exactly anything about this.
Actually, Nobuyoshi Araki and Martin Parr struck me as one of the most amusing ones amongst the list. So
that's it for the beginning. There might be questions coming out of that which I would like to try to answer later.
And we are quite naturally getting into another point for a little excerpt from Natasha's movie, actually, and then I would like us to comment on that. So I'm gonna play a visit or a visit of the gallerist at his house in Kyjov, and then excerpt from his exhibition. And again, thank you, Natasha, for providing these. I hope these are gonna be with the sound finally. And it's gonna work out. So here we go.
Matthias Arndt aus Berlin.
Mluví česky nebo?
Deutsch, wir müssen Deutsch sprechen.
Deutsche?
Ja, wieder. Das ist der Adi.
Dankeschön.
Danke. Matthias macht eine Ausstellung von deinen Fotografien in Berlin.
Wo nimmt die Fotografie?
Ja, die du mir gegeben hast.
Ich habe nicht gegeben.
Und das ist die Einladung für die Ausstellung. Da steht Ihr Name, Miroslav Tichý, und da ist dann auch eine Abbildung der Produktion drauf. Und ein kleiner Text und andere Sachen. Das gebe ich Ihnen mal, dann haben Sie das auch.
Ich weiß nichts.
Das ist eine der besten Galerien in Deutschland.
Ja, ganz genau.
Wenn Sie jeden Tag 30 Fotos und mehr gemacht haben, und gab es da einen Plan, also einen Plan,
Nein.
nicht so ein Jahresplan oder so, wie die Kommunisten das hatten, aber ein Plan, also zu sagen,
ich bin durch die Stadt gegangen, ich sah nichts, ich hörte nichts, nur ich weiß nicht, was ich fotografiert habe. Dann viele Jahre habe ich auf dem Schwimmbad fotografiert, über wie sagt man, Zaun.
Oh, und das ist vom Fernseher fotografiert, oder? Von einem Fernseher?
Vielleicht.
Zeig mal das.
Das gefärbte?
Ist auch schön. Boah. Das ist ein Bild, das habe ich noch nie gesehen, das Bild. Takže právě jsme si mysleli v tom Arl ve městě Van Gogha a Gogena budeš mít výstavu. Já tam nemůžu jet, já ti nemůžu zastoupit. Tak jsme mysleli, jestli tady paní docentka, jestli bychom ji neposlali jako delegaci za tebe, a že by potom tady i prostě za prvé, že tam natočila by to na nějakou malou kameru, že, na digitálku nějakou, a že by ti to pak taky ukázala.
A warum kann es nicht sehen, die Bilder, die Fotografien? Ich schmeiß es in das Kamin oder was?
Weiter, ja, das wissen wir. Gut. Also wir versuchen, ne?
Miroslav Tichý hat statt öffentliche, offizielle Kunst, die gerahmt und in den Museen präsentiert war, sich sein eigenes intimes Museum geschaffen. Der Weltflucht korrespondiert oft der Wachtraum und Tichý versinkt in eine Art permanenten erotischen Wachtraum. Denn über die Jahre erlitt er zahlreiche Repressalien dieses totalitären Systems. Er versuchte zwar weiter zu malen, wurde immer in größere Isolation getrieben, wurde auch interniert in Gefängnisse, in Straflager, in Erziehungsanstalten, in psychiatrische Kliniken.
So let's say this to be a little bit of description of what Thomas was talking about, or illustration per se. And you all had the chance to actually exhibit Mr. Tichý, or meet him, or to talk to him, or to be part of this world. How can you comment on this topic, actually, on the actual exhibitions, on the actual communication with the so-called curator, and so on and so on, or curator, collector? Sorry.
If I may, I think this situation filmed by Natasha is absolutely perfect, and in fact, I'm nicely surprised to see it again after many years, and it perfectly describes like what happened during, let's say, the early years, and as Thomas was describing, in fact, the mechanics of the of how Roman Buxbaum managed to let's say, make some kind of economical miracle around Tichý. So it was very efficient, and on the other hand, it was also very harsh in a way to, let's say, the needs of the old man. But it's on the other hand, it wasn't easy to get, let's say, to make Tichý anyhow conform with the exhibition, because when I was doing this 2006 big retrospective in House of Arts, so we never got any permission from him. Also, I spent several days with him, like in the nice talks, and so he had some kind of, let's say, disrespect or decline toward like any public presentation. On the other hand, like after we spoke a lot about his painting and photographs, so in the end he promised to come to see the opening in person, out of the public, to be there present for, let's say, for quick visits taken by car from Kyjov to Brno and back quickly, and we planned it for all the duration of the exhibition, but in the end it didn't happen for several reasons, that he also went to hospital and so on. So it was always on the verge, and as Thomas said, that Tobia Bezola probably didn't get confirmation for the exhibition. So I might say after those years that in fact I didn't as well, and I don't think anybody maybe could in that. And it's a big question, like how much was it also influence of Roman Buxbaum, who already by that time was, let's say, not in friendly position with Tichý, or definitely was like suspicious to Tichý. And it was for me also surprising to come into Tichý's house, and in fact being there sent by Roman Buxbaum to meet Jana Hebnerova and then to meet Tichý in the end, and then to find out that in fact the man who gave me the contact, so he's not really desired to come there in person. So it was really weird set of mixed relations, economical, personal, and so on, around 2005, 6, 7. And so it was difficult to make up an exhibition, make up a book, and of course, it was connected even with some let's say, ethical decisions, which I tried to keep at some good standards, but it was definitely necessary to make some compromises to make it finish. But one thing I'd like to note is that I maybe the only person who got Tichý's confirmation about a text which was about him. So when we finished the book, when I finished the text for the book, so we really sat for 2 hours, and he was listening to the text, and in the end he said not it's perfect and beautiful, but he said, well, publish it, whatever it takes. And at least I don't think he ever like fully paid attention to it, but at least I think there's like formal situation to give him the possibility to comment on it was necessary, and that's something which I felt appropriate, let's say.
I think that's right, Pavel. Like, I think of all the curators, you're probably the only one who got a clear approval by Tichý. What Bezola told me, Bezola went to see him, and Tichý told him, I don't care, do whatever you want. And as far as I know, the only other curator who went to see him is Marcus Landert, but there was no exhibition in the end. But Marcus Landert also went to see him to get approval. All of the other curators relied on Buxbaum words, saying, okay, no, he doesn't want to see anyone, I'll take care of it. So it was a sort of laziness by the curators at Pompidou, everywhere, to say, okay, Buxbaum is taking care of it, we don't need to miss it. Which is not very professional, let's put it this way.
It's not. On the other hand, it was also not easy to visit Tichý. It was also it was very exotic experience, let's say. The older he was, the more exotic it was, and sometimes it was even it wasn't very fruitful to sit with him for half a day, and to sometimes it was very repetitive, and I wasn't so lucky to meet him in his, let's say, better years, and it was by time when he was more tired, more ill, and so on. So he had perfect moments, but on the other hand, it took a lot of patience to get along with him. And of course, he didn't. He spoke some German, but to do real research in Kyjov, it was a big advantage to be the local and to get to understand the local context.
Okay, thank you for the entries. I guess that Marc's block is nearing, and before that, would like Thomas and Natasha comment on this part before. I'd actually like to know from Natasha when you actually met all these people. You interviewed Mr. Tichý for a year. You did an interview with Mrs. Hebnarova, with Mr. Buxbaum. What's your take on all this?
That's a big question. Well, where to start? I think that everyone has his picture of Miroslav Tichý, as I do have, and it's interesting to hear that you said Betzola was visiting Tichý. I forgot completely about it, because when I did the interview and I just watched it, it's on the DVD, he said something like that he's not a professional artist, and that's why he's shy about coming to this big exhibition in Switzerland, which sounds really funny for me, because he was not shy, but he simply wouldn't come. Yeah, it's I think so. About Jana, we have just spoke shortly about her, and also I was also sent by Buxbaum actually to Jana to meet Mr. Tichý. It was actually, I wanted to make a film about Art Brut, and I found a picture of Miroslav Tichý and a picture he made in a catalog. It was probably the first exhibition, or one of the first exhibitions of his artwork in abroad, and I found it didn't really it wasn't really Art Brut work of art, and so I was really curious how it came that he's in this catalog. And so I contacted Mr. Buxbaum, and so I heard first his story, and he told me also that he doesn't think that he's an outsider artist, and that he's gonna be a really big artist. That it's starting in this year, 2005, or the next. I met him, I think, 2004, and he said from now on he will be a big artist. So he told me his story, and then I came to Kyjov and met Jana, who's she was basically a friend, and I became friend with her as well, and so I learned her perspective as a second point of view, and then I met Mr. Tichý, and so these were so different worlds for me, and I think everybody of these people has his own point of view, and some of it's also Buxbaum. He told me that I think he really liked him. I mean, I think apart from this myth making and business or a model and whatever, he was saying that I think he was when he was a child, that he was making on him a big impression. And this is also what Jana told me, that when she was a child with her brother, that Mr. Tichý was making puppets for them and theater. So he had this playful way with children. So I think that even also Roman Buxbaum, when he was visiting his grandmother, he experienced this kind of playfulness, and it must have made a big impression on him as well as on the other children. And that was a time when he was making photographs. So why not make a pinhole camera with the children and go around and send them into the city, or into the town, not city, and tell them make photos. Yeah, so everyone of them, I have the impression even now, still there are so many various stories and myths, and he's still considered among many people as an arts outsider or outside artist, which is really surprising to me. I don't see him like that, and yeah.
Okay, thanks for the addition. So it's, again, we are confirming that it's a multifaceted story. It's not very, very easy to describe. And Thomas, do you have anything to add here? You unmuted for a little bit, so I thought that you have some addition on.
Yeah, I have a little addition. It is something I unfortunately I really have to read to you, because it tells, because we were also we heard it a couple of times that it is a lot about storytelling, that Miroslav Tichý was telling his story, and that many other people who are involved into the whole project are also telling his story. But the main storyteller in the whole context, and I'm sure that we will learn this later from Marc, is Roman Buxbaum. And I did one little research, a tiny micro research in that whole project. That was how Roman Buxbaum referenced on himself in the various books which he wrote, because he has he's the one who was telling the story of Miroslav Tichý from 2005 to 2010, let's say, from the beginning in Kunsthaus Zürich to New York ICP, the catalog. And it is very interesting. I start with a catalog from Zurich. There he said in German, I was Tichy's neighbor. I am his pupil, his documentarist, his collector, his supporter, and his admirer. 2008, he writes, I was the son of his friend and neighbor first, and then became his pupil, a collector of his work, and above all, his admirer. For the Centre Pompidou, in the same year, he's writing, first, I was born the nephew of Miroslav Tichý's best friend, my uncle, and a little boy in the neighborhood. 30 years later, I became his discoverer, collector, and promoter of his work. Now I help to take care of him in his old days. And in 2010, another 2 years later, finally, he writes in the catalog for the ICP in New York, as his psychiatrist, friend, and biographer, I couldn't help but think about his relationship with women and his sex life. And this is really something which is so speaking how Roman Buxbaum makes the role he had in the life of Miroslav Tichý bigger and bigger and bigger, until he finally becomes Miroslav Tichý's psychiatrist, which he, as the people we interviewed said, he never was. He never was a psychiatrist. He had a very good professor for psychiatry in a nearby city where he went regularly on. So, but this is, I think this tells a little about the USP, the unique selling point, which Roman Buxbaum created with Miroslav Tichý. It was a perfect marketing tool. It was a super experience he did, and this is something which you really can admire. Not necessarily everything is good what we admire, but this is something which is very special.
Okay, thank you for the entry. That was actually pretty interesting to have a comparison year by year of these different narratives. Not to speak that the narrative from the year 1990 of describing him as an art brut artist and stuff like that was completely different back then. And I guess we are naturally getting to the Marc's entry, so the mic is yours.
Okay, before starting on this, I just want to react on the issue of, is he an art brut, is he an outsider artist or not? People who work on outsider art fight all the time about how do you define outsider art. The old definition was someone who is mentally ill and someone who never went to art school, someone who is institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital and never went to art school. That's the old definition, that's the Dubuffet definition. What you have more and more now, if you work in art brut, is the fact that there are people who have their own, they are marginal in some manners. And you can say all artists are marginal, of course, but I mean, it's a question of degree. And in the 1990 catalog, obviously, Tichý doesn't belong. It's obvious. Plus, he's the only photographer. All the other ones are painters or sculptors. So he obviously doesn't belong. If you look now, for example, there's an exhibition in Brussels now on photo brut, and the approach to what is art brut, what is outside art, is much wider now. And then you see that Tichý belongs with other people within this group of, it's a collection by a French collector of art brut. And you see that Tichý belongs to that. He's not totally foreign in that. So the issue of not having been to art school doesn't exist anymore. And the issue art brut is only people who are in mental hospital, doesn't exist anymore. And now you have basically people who are sort of on the margin of society. Just that point briefly. I'll come to my point. What have been the various critics or talks or fantasies about Tichý, and I've listed 4 or 5. The first one is that at the beginning, some people thought it was fake, it was a hoax. Some people said it didn't exist. It was a pure creation of Buxbaum, of someone who created this work, didn't exist. I worked with Quentin Bajac, with the curator at Pompidou in 2008, and he told me initially he thought that. He wasn't sure the guy existed. And a guy called Stuart Alexander, who is or was the VP of the photo department at Christie's, said in 2007, Tichý's work is so good, so unlikely, and so much controlled by Buxbaum that I sometimes have wondered whether or not his entire photographic oeuvre might have been an invention of Buxbaum. So this was the first misconception, that Tichý doesn't exist. It's just a creation. The second critique, to my surprise, I've not heard it a lot, I've not read it a lot, is from a feminist viewpoint. That Tichý was a voyeur, that Tichý was a peeping Tom. You find the words here and there, but I've not read anything really constructed as a constructed feminist analysis about Tichý's work. So there's a plan for an exhibition in Rome, but I'm not sure it's going to come out, where an Italian writer who is an important feminist in Italy is writing about that, but I haven't seen a text yet. So this is a point that you could expect to find in the criticism of Tichý, and personally, I've not found anything of substance, just a few words here and there. The third point, but Thomas really spoke a lot about it, is the money. A guy called Peter Nedoma, who is or was the director of the Rodolphe Museum, said or wrote an article saying how to make money off a freak. And that's clearly part of it. It's a marketing creation. It's purely speculation. We talked about it already. The fourth type of criticism is more important, saying that he's not a real artist, he's not a serious artist, for 2 reasons. Some people look at the work and say, I don't like this work. This is a work that has no value whatsoever. I'll give you 2 examples. One, Pavel, you know him, is Vladimir Birgus, who refused to include him in the show Czech Photographers of the 20th Centuries in Prague 2006 and Bonn 2009 saying is a manipulation of curators. He's just an amateur. And same thing when you had the show at ICP, one of the art critics called Glenn Ruga called him, you said caveman, he said Unabomber. He's the Unabomber of photography. He's neither a genius, nor an artist, nor a great photographer. He's the invention of the curators. More serious, in my viewpoint, are a few people who says, if you don't have the conscience, or you don't have the, you don't put forward the idea, you deny the fact that you are an artist, are you really an artist? Nathalie Heinisch, who is a French, very conservative art historian, wrote that, saying, but I would love to see him as an artist, but if the man denies that he is an artist, how can we look at him as an artist if he doesn't want to be looked at as an artist? Which is a question that you find also in outside art. More importantly, and that's the main point, is the dominant, the normative discourse by Buxbaum. Now, we all say that. We all say Buxbaum was his discoverer, was his promoter, had a lot of energy, did a magnificent promotional work, conserved the works, but took advantage of it. Being, by training a long time ago, a mathematician, I said, okay, what's the proof? So I've looked at the books I have here, and I've got 17 books about Tichý in 8 languages, with 38 writers, and only looking at the pages that are written, not the table of contents, not the bibliography, not the chronology, the critical text. There are 65 articles and 545 pages in my 17 books. Okay? Of those 17 books, there are 9 major books in which Buxbaum wrote, which are the catalogs in Zurich, Japan, China, Pompidou, ICP, Moscow, the Torst catalog, the Koenig catalog, and the book published by the Foundation Tichý. Of those 9 major books, Buxbaum wrote in each one of them, his writings occupy 60% of the critical text. 210 pages out of 348. It goes from Pompidou, where he has only 25% of the pages, ICP 29, the maximum is the Japanese catalog, where he's got 96% of the pages. 96% of the pages of a catalog about an artist being only by one writer. I've never seen that in my life. Buxbaum is not present in 3 catalogs, the Sanguinetti one, the various versions, the Frankfurt one, and of course, the Mannheim one on which Thomas was responsible. And there are 5 minor books, which are just a moment, the Stockholm catalog, the Dublin catalog, the Polar Gallery catalog in Brussels, and the 2 books, Tichý for Artists, Artists for Tichý, where Buxbaum wrote in the Artists for Tichý. So in total, if we look at the 17 books, Buxbaum wrote 40% of the 545 pages, 215 pages. I come as a very distant second. I wrote only 38 pages, which is 7% of all of that. Now, what does it say? Well, Buxbaum provided the curators with an everything included package, which was very easy and which was made to facilitate the work of the curator, while, as we said, discouraging them to go and meet Tichý. Tichý's photographs, Tichý's camera equipment on loan from the foundation, Buxbaum text, and the film Buxbaum made. And in all of the exhibitions, you find that. And all of that constructed a beautiful story that would allow the visitor and the reader to gain access to Tichý's works and to Tichý's world, because his works and his world were supposed to be not very interesting or not very comprehensible without such a narrative mediation. And in that mediation, you find all what I call the incantatory ingredients by which to construct a fascinating mythology. Suffering and repression under communism, the marginality of the anti-hero, and the proximity to mental illness. Such a beautiful story often played a very seductive role, if not an anesthetizing role on people. And I plead guilty, because when I discovered Tichý, it was through Buxbaum, and for the first year or year and a half, before I met Natasha, actually, for the first year, I thought, okay, this is a wonderful story. And there it's very clear, very coherent, very attractive. So it's a revealed truth, and you succumb to it very easily. And clearly, what Thomas was saying, and Thomas analyzed the variation over time, it gives a very legitimizing and self-justifying function to Buxbaum. He has the best role. He's a developer. He's the benevolent promoter of the man's work. He is the one who has been very close to Tichý since Tichý taught little Roman, nephew of his best friend, how to take a camera school up. And Buxbaum is the one who takes care of him in his old age and help him financially. And as we said, at the same time, the fact that Tichý didn't want to speak, he didn't want to show himself, he didn't want to exhibit, he didn't want to sell his work, constructed what I've called a counter myth that allowed him to remain indifferent, negligent, at the margin of the success, just as he had been at the margins of the communist system. And there was a vacuum. By the fact that Tichý withdrew from the art world, a vacuum was created. No one had the information, had the knowledge, had the facts, had enough facts to dare to doubt, to question the beautiful story by Buxbaum. So it was very coherent, very skillfully orchestrated. And the first one who went against that were Natasha with her film, Sanguinetti in Prague, Pavel, and Thomas with the Mannheim exhibitions. Before that, you had sort of the same beautiful story everywhere. So what I've tried to do here in this work, which is actually something that Thomas published in a previous version in his catalog, is not only to analyze, to put words, but also to measure what has been the impact of a monolithic discourse about an artist. Thank you.
Thank you for a great entry, Marc. So I guess that what happened wrong here, or what was wrong here, that we are all just waiting for the magical story that happened or that unfolded before us, and we just took it as a truth for the first time. And when the disillusionment came, there wasn't enough space for it.
It's so easy. I mean, at Pompidou, I know Quentin Bajac was the curator, but Clément Chiroux was the number 2, was also a bit involved in the exhibition, wrote in the catalog. He's a good friend. Clément now is at the MoMA, he's there at the Photography at the MoMA. And Clément said, you know, to us it was magical. It was a fairy tale. We had everything ready, so we did other things. We put it in a more of an artistic framework. Bezzola compared it to the classical painters. Clément compared it with other Central European artists. But the story itself about Tichý, it was brought to us on a plate, so we took it. And now we know, but at the time we didn't know.
Yeah, now we are here, and we have to do these discussions to move it a little bit to the other side. Mm-hmm. Actually, anyone has anything else to add? Because I guess we have a little bit of an apogee right now, and I would after that I would like to start with the questions, but I've got just one of them. So
I have a quick note, if I may.
Definitely.
There was a beautiful theater performance about Tichý, which is something which I was predicting even when I was working on it in 2006. So even then I realized it's impossible to describe Tichý without Buxbaum and Buxbaum without Tichý. In fact, there's even some kind of mutual relation, so one without another wouldn't work, and they're inseparable. So in fact, the situation when we prepared the first exhibition and the book wasn't still ready to do that, but I think Marc, for example, kind of deconstructed this relation a bit. But I think in long terms it would be interesting to go even deeper and maybe to write after even much more years the story. But the theater performance already did it, and in fact it was even for me myself to realize my role in the whole thing was interesting. That some people were even named in the theater play, some weren't, but in fact I imagined myself as one of those let's say little bit foolish, stupid curators coming into the house and being confronted with the miracles artist. So, and I must say the play was marvelous, poetic, and in fact it was got as close to Tichý as possible in the sense that it's something which we can hardly ever fully comprehend, and it's some kind of myth which lives its own life, and we just have to keep respect to it in best possible way.
But it remains, the question is, without Buxbaum, would we know Tichý?
No.
Probably not.
It's inseparable, definitely. Yeah. And as some of you mentioned already, I am definitely still have respect to Roman Buxbaum's genius, both in sense of taste, sense of promotion, sense of even art business. So he had all the perfect, let's say, starting positions for that, like being on the verge of art market, and even Switzerland as kind of the best land for like starting any stars for with its strong like machinery for art fairs and art business. So it's something which you could hardly imagine and make up. So
without Zeman, maybe we'd know Tichý. If it had not been Zeman in 2004 at Seville, it may have been someone else later who have been exposed to Buxbaum promotion, maybe. But without Buxbaum, no.
No, never. On the other hand, it's even that is questionable. I think maybe we would know Tichý in slightly different form, because they were people who knew about Tichý. They were people who were exhibiting Tichý even before Buxbaum, but it was kind of rare occurrence. They were friends, they knew about him. Even some Czech photographers knew about him. Back in the 80s, they were visiting him with students and so on. So he wasn't like completely unknown to anybody. But on the other hand, of course, like he wouldn't probably reach outside of Czech Republic, and he wouldn't be the Worldstar, as Natasha named him.
Definitely, nobody would know him in his while he lived. You know, maybe now somebody would find his photographs and exhibit them. But when he was living, he was so opposing. But only Buxbaum could do this and say, okay, even though you are opposing, I'm gonna make you a great artist. This is for you. He was always saying, this is for you. So.
This might be, Natasha, and but it is all we are speaking now is purely speculative. And what we did before was we were trying to put together the facts. So this is really the other side, because it definitely would have been a different narrative. This is very clear. Without Roman Buxbaum, it would have been a different narrative. Whoever would have found it would have told a different story, and we might not sit together tonight. So
I'm a little bit surprised that the narrative didn't change, you know, because I did this film and I was visiting Tichý afterwards, but then of course I lost after some years track, and now I'm coming back, and I'm surprised that this narrative is still there, that it's not that there is no opposition or correction or whatever.
I think there is. I think the narrative has changed. I did a quick research on exhibitions which recently have been, and I realized there have been no big institutional exhibitions anymore. It's over. And there have some exhibitions in commercial galleries, not the most prominent ones. And that's I think the knowledge about the facts are now visible to those who want to know.
Definitely, I think like let's say that there's knowledge about like kind of manipulations between the museum world and the let's say commercial galleries and so on. So that's quite clear to everybody now. And in fact, even the if you look at the prices of the photographs, how they changed along the market. So even that is quite illustrative fact.
And actually, if I shrink it a little bit, isn't it like shameful for or not shameful? Isn't it that all those institutions who would like to exhibit him now would have to actually say or actually explain that they were wrong in some kind of way before?
No, why?
There might be different institutions, different collections. There are two, as far as I know, there are two projects now, but both of them have been totally postponed by COVID and everything. There is a project by Sanguinetti to show his collection in Rome. He showed it in Prague, as you know. He showed a little bit of it, but I think 20 photos, 30 photos in Marseille. And he has been discussing, but for the last 3 years, 4 years, I don't know, an exhibition in Rome. But Gianfranco is not in good health, so things take a bit of time. And there is a very, very vague project to make an exhibition in Lisbon, in a museum as well. There may be others, but those are the two projects I know of. So it's not dead, but it clearly is not at the same level than it was until 2010, clearly.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that points back to Mr. Buxbaum and his abilities, which put it that high actually in the exhibition world. Okay.
On the other hand, I must say, like there's one thing which, as I said, about my respect to Roman Buxbaum for his ability. So on the other hand, his disability was always, let's say, to stay consistent about, let's say, being manipulative to both to the artist, both also to Jana Hebnerova, who played a big role in the whole thing as a caretaker. But on the other hand, also in the beginnings as one of the like reaching hands to Tichý, who were still friendly with Buxbaum before the first or around the first exhibition, and then they quite logically departed from each other. So I would say this is something which then got obvious after some time to almost everybody who got in touch with the legend. So the legend keeps living. On the other hand, I think most of the biggest institutions and galleries are now aware that let's say the Tichý boom is over, and let's say the beauty is still there, the importance is there, the example is there, but on the other hand, on the say level of keeping up the legend, building it up and up again is not really necessary.
Okay, thanks for that. And I've got one question for from the public. Tichý is a perfect example of the search for the boundaries of photography, not by the artists, but by critics, gallerists. So then who creates art? Mr. Pohrybny asks. It's pretty general question, yeah, I know it. But I guess we talked a little bit about that. It's kind of both, and it's kind of this world all together, and that it's very rarely just up to one person. Yeah, but if anyone has a comment on that.
I do. Not especially on Tichý, but in general, I think the critics have lost all power. Until 50 or 60 years ago,
I'm sorry, did they lost power or did they disappear?
Until 50 years ago, And from the 19th century, from Baudelaire or whatever, till the 1960 or 70, the critics were the one who were saying, this is art, and this is what it's like. And they were creating movements, whatever, arte povera, expressionism abstract, whatever. Today, they have lost power. The critics, and I'm a critic, so I know what I'm talking about. We can enjoy ourselves, but who makes art today? The big collectors and the big museums. That's all. Now, of course, the artist is art, but who says it's art? Who defines it as art? Mr. Pinault and others, and the heads of the MoMA, Pompidou, what have you. If you don't go through one or both of them, you're not yet an artist. You may become one day, but you're not yet a recognized artist. But I'm very pessimistic about it. Maybe some people are more optimistic here than I am.
But don't forget the galleries. They are very important too.
Yes. Yeah. The gallery exists because the collectors are there. The galleries are working according to the whims of the big collectors.
Yes,
because
but
that way not the contrary.
They are finding the artists. They are making them big. They are exploiting them. They let them disappear again.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
All right.
But we have one which was a little too short. This is that Miroslav Tichý is really a wonderful artist. He has a great ability to make photographs in a really small and very limited field in which he was exploring it. He had a radius of a couple of kilometers in his hometown Kyjov, and he was taking almost only images of women, and he was photographing them secretly, and he was photographing them openly. When he photographed them openly, they are often appearing to him, and then you can see that they often smile. The women are often smiling and looking for his eyes or for the camera. When he does it secretly, it is different, but he's always interested in the beauty of the female body, and it is not important for him if the body is young or younger or old or older. The beauty is always in the forms of the female body, and this is something which is quite outstanding, I think, in the work of an artist who started, as I would think, his photography in the 1970s and did it in the 1970s and 80s mainly.
Okay, so not to end with a sad thing like that we are missing art critique, which we indeed are. I've got one question that bugs me the most, actually. Mr. Tichý is considered or is mostly talked about to be a photographer. Do you think that he's a photographer as an artist? Last question.
I didn't understand that.
I don't understand.
If he's a photographer, if Miroslav Tichý is a photographer, because I still consider him being much more a painter, even though he actually broke through as a photographer and was presented as a photographer. But as he says, his photographs he didn't consider them much, he didn't like them much, and so on and so on. And he was very protective of his paintings. So
that's right. I think that was his ambitions to show the paintings, especially the paintings were very secured. I remember when Jana Hepnarova was taking care of his house when he was away for hospital, so they had to count all the paintings which were there before he left, and then they had to count them again when he got back from the hospital, and they were the most precise things to him. So probably it is that way. On the other hand, it's question if we should divide artists on photographers and painters. And even when I get back to the beginning of what I had as the introduction, so the question is how much the modernist artist, which in my point of view, Tichý still was even in postmodern times. So how much he can take on or take off a label of being a painter or photographer. So it's very, let's say, complicated, and you would have to take it from different angles, eras, periods, and so on, and as with any naming.
When I met him, I had to go through about 1 hour of looking at each of the painting, which he wanted absolutely to show me, taking the dust out and everything with Jana, and he absolutely wanted to show his painting. Now, does that mean that he defines himself as a great painter, or does that mean that because of his success as a photographer, he's trying to give some other balance on the painting side? In my modest opinion, if there were only his paintings, he would never have been known. They are interesting, they're not bad, but they have nothing extraordinary. His paintings, those I saw, as I said, I saw 10, 15 of them, those paintings have nothing that would give one a feeling of, oh, this is something totally different, something that really is very important for the history of art. As a photographer, what he did, on the contrary, is very important for the history of photography.
I have a slightly different view on the topic. I think that he clearly was a painter. He was a painter, and he loved drawing, and his drawings are very interesting also. But his photography was something totally different, because he did the photography only for himself. The photography was extremely private. He did never, as none of the people we were interviewing was ever discussing Tichý's photographs with him while he was not the prominent artist, which he became in 2000 and something. So it was something he did for himself. He took these photographs. He saved the films. He was hanging these films in that part of the building, and he had something which was, he was incredibly focused and determined to that, but it was for him. It was not for the public. The paintings and the drawings were maybe for the public, but definitely not the photography. This was something like the core of his existence in the later years, I guess.
I'm not sure, because I think he will withdraw from the public. I mean, what is the public anyway? His neighbors and friends, as I know from his stories and the stories of Jana and others, he was giving photographs also to his friends. So, I mean, it was not that private that he wouldn't show it or give it as a souvenir. Or yeah. So I'm not sure about that. Apart from anything, I know that we had this conversation that he was still having in mind to paint something. He was still planning to draw. So I think he was, for me, I'm not a critic, but for me, I think he was an artist, simply. For him, it was, photography was another way of expressing himself, or another medium simply to deal with. And it was he was combining even drawing and photography. So I wouldn't split it that up like into two different things. Yeah, that's just my humble
for the
feeling.
answers. Yeah, I didn't want to put him in the box, definitely. I just wanted to straighten this out a little bit, and you did so nicely, all of you. So thanks a lot for that. We are nearing the end of this endeavor. So is there anything you would like to add? Anything you think that wasn't mentioned, that didn't sound in the presentation? Anyone want to add something on the final word? Okay, so I guess not.
One short personal note, I think that Natasha's film is really so important because it is the only source I know which enables us to see what it was in these late years, in his early years of success, in his late years of life. And I think she did it really wonderful. I'm very happy that we had it today, and I'm really very happy that you did it that way in which you were doing it. It is a great thing you did.
I agree.
Me too.
Yeah, amen to that. And I have last one excerpt from that movie, so I'm gonna play it as a goodbye. Thank you very much for your time, all of you. It's been pretty wonderful 2 hours of my life. I hope to meet you again. Thanks for APF for making this possible, and enjoy. Have a great day. Have a great rest of the day. I'm gonna play the thing, and then I'm gonna switch off the stream. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Christoph, for organizing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
It was nice seeing you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, nice seeing you. Have a lovely evening, and good luck to France then.
Ještě jsou tam ty fotografie někde na zemi, pod papírama.
A díváte se občas na ně?
Niemals. Jenom když to náhodou objevím a tak to zase zahodím.
Tak se možná na to podíváte, ne?
Niemals.
Lidi fotí, aby měli vzpomínky. Většina.
Mě vzpomínky nezajímají. Mě zajímá jenom výsledek. Víte, co je to výsledek?
Vím. A co vás zajímá na tom výsledku?
Nichts. Ob es gut ist oder schlecht ist.
A jak to poznáte?
To poznám podle toho, co mě zajímá. Ale mě to nezajímá vůbec. Überhaupt nichts. Já jsem měl aparát, 4 dřívka jsem hřebíčkama sloukl dohromady, tam jsem nasadil objektiv z nějakého starého aparátu a tak jsem fotil.
A jak byl velký?
Wieder Film. So.